welcome you as chair of the Hampshire branch to the most wonderful evening that we have gotten available for you. Following up the sessions on how to achieve chartered status and generally to achieve the fellow, we're now going to the in-depth about how to achieve the chartered engineer status. And this is followed very similarly to the one we had a few weeks ago, which is how to get the chartered IT professional. Now, at this stage, what I will be doing is passing over fairly shortly to Russell Friend, who will be leading this one. But just to mention very quickly, the next event that we've got coming up, which is on Wednesday, and do have a look at this one, and it's how Ordnance Survey has actually grown their own senior professionals. So taking them in straight from university or even from A level and taking them the whole way through. And I'm hoping that later on we will have another in-depth session about how to go for the BCS fellow status. At that stage, I'd like to actually pass across to Russell Friend to introduce himself and to lead us into this session. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you very much, Margaret, and good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can all see my first slide on the screen there. So as Margaret said, I'm Russell Friend. I'm the Standards Development Manager within BCS. So currently I look after our Chartered IT Professional, Chartered Engineering and IMAC registrations, and FedIP, which is a professional registration in health and social care under the auspices of the Federation of Informatics Professionals. Margaret's kindly given me the opportunity this evening to talk you through the detailed process of applying for Chartered Engineer. And I'm also going to be joined by one of our volunteer assessors, John Nicholson. He's running a little late, but as soon as he's on, I'll be able to introduce you to him. And John will talk you through from an assessor's perspective, so the sort of what they're looking for in the application and during the interview. So hopefully the presentation should last somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, giving time for questions. And we'll try and pick up the questions as we go through. So please, if you've got any questions, write them in the chat, and we'll endeavour to answer that as we at certain intervals through the presentation. So I'm going to talk about the routes to application and then the process. And of course, there are three sort of key players within the process. There's yourselves, the applicants. There's the BCS service delivery team. So they're the people that do all the operational stuff to make sure that your application is appropriately dealt with. And then there are assessors who will look at your evidence and then make a judgment on that and interview you. And then I'll hand over, and then I'll talk about some supporting tools, some things that we have that you have through membership that can help you in your progress towards achieving Chartered Engineer. And then I'll hand you over to John. And John will talk to you, as I say, about the application from an assessor's perspective. Then I've got some further information and some links that hopefully you'll find helpful, and then we'll summarise, and then we'll go into the questions. So the routes to application, there are three routes to application. There's the experiential route, and that's if you hold no formal qualifications that are currently accredited towards engineering, or you hold no formal qualifications at all, then you would go through the experiential route. And that would mean you'd need to provide evidence against the UK spec, and I'll get onto more detail in that later, that covers both your competence, your performance, and your underpinning knowledge and understanding. The other route is the accredited route, or the standard route as it's known within BCS. And that's where you hold a qualification that's accredited towards CEng. There are, in fact, I provide a link later on where you can look for qualifications that are accredited towards CEng. And therefore, if you hold one of those, then you just need to provide evidence against the UK spec competencies, because the qualification meets the underpinning knowledge and understanding requirements. And then the third route, which is a route that we rarely use, is the technical report route. And again, that's if you're trying to provide evidence of underpinning knowledge and understanding, and you write a technical synopsis to deliver that evidence. We very rarely use it. I think I think it's about 3 times it's been used in the last, well, since I've been with BCS, which is about 5 years now. So I'm going to talk about the applicant, and of course the application begins with the applicant through, and that's achieved via My BCS. So when you go into My BCS, you'll see in the links at the top, get registered. And if you link on there, it will take you to the relevant pages. You'll pick Chartered Engineer, and then it will take you to all the guidance material, the application form, links to the specification. And then with BCS service delivery, you'll complete your application form and you'll submit it through My BCS. That'll arrive within BCS service delivery team. Now, the service delivery team will then contact assessors to undertake an initial review. So they will look at your written evidence and they may come back to you for more information. Or they may pass your written evidence, and that will move it on to the next stage, which is the interview. Or they could potentially decline it if there's significantly lacking evidence in there. So their judgments will be made against the underpinning knowledge and understanding for the UK spec and against the competencies, of course, unless you've gone down the accredited route. And if you're successful at that stage, then you'll be invited to interview. And it's at that interview where you'll have 2 assessors there. That'll be arranged. It'll be an online interview arranged at a convenient time for both yourself and the assessors. And then the assessors, that's the opportunity for them to draw out as much evidence as they can from you towards the chartered engineer requirements. And then at the end of that, they'll make a decision, which would be award or decline. And then that will go on in the case of the Engineering Council, that then goes on to what's called the review panel. And that's the quality system that the Engineering Council requires to have in place. So the review panel look at every application and they can agree or disagree with the assessor's decision. If they disagree and you were awarded the pass by the assessors, then they can overturn that decision to a decline. However, if the award is declined and they disagree with that, they can't overturn it to a pass. And those are all rules set out by the Engineering Council. So the UK specification covers 5 criteria. There's A is knowledge and understanding, and that's broken down into 3 areas. And I won't go into those in great detail, but I've provided a link in there to the UK spec where you can get all the detail of that. But there are a couple of areas within the underpinning knowledge and understanding. And it's basically your opportunity then to provide evidence of where you've applied technical principles relevant to your area of practice. So it could be solutions to problems or dealing with significant technical complexity or integration of a range of technologies. B is design, development and solving engineering problems. So it's about the ability to apply engineering knowledge and effectively, efficiently to individual tasks. Then C is responsibility management and leadership. So, and this isn't necessarily about managing people, because a lot of people look at these things and think, well, I can't achieve that. I have no line management responsibility. It's broader than that. It could be managing people. It could be managing tasks, activities. So it's about your level of responsibility for managing and leading on something, not necessarily on someone, if you know, if you understand. Then there's communication and interpersonal skills. So, and it's really important at this level that you demonstrate that you can communicate effectively, and that would be in written or oral communication, or whatever means of communication, electronic communication. So it's about demonstrating and delivering evidence of how you communicate effectively within your occupation, within your specialism. And the final one, E, is your personal professional commitment. And this is around such things as your commitment to CPD. So what CPD have you undertaken? What CPD have you got planned for the future to ensure that you maintain your technical competence? It's about practicing ethically with everything you do. And basically, it's a sort of very much around the complying with a code of conduct. So to apply, as I said, to apply for chartered engineer, you need to provide evidence of any relevant qualifications. So even if you're not going down the accredited route, if you're going down the experiential route and you've got qualifications that you think are relevant, provide evidence of those qualifications because they can be used towards your understanding and underpinning knowledge requirements. And you'll then need to complete a series of statements describing your experience under those headings I've just discussed: knowledge and understanding, design, development and solving engineering problems, responsibility management, leadership, communication, interpersonal skills, and personal and professional commitment. So you'll need to provide statements under there. And if when you see the application form, we sort of ask it in a question style, in a bid to help with completing that application form. So you're almost answering the questions of that. So, you know, examples of when you have. And a very good way of structuring that, because sometimes people look at that and it can become quite daunting to answer that. But a very good way of structuring your responses is using a technique called STAR: situation, task, action, result. Because in assessing competence, it needs to be about what you have done, not what you would do. So if you can deliver evidence of a situation, you know, a situation that you've been in, the task that it meant you had to undertake, the actions you delivered in achieving that task, and what the results were. And when you include the results, it's often very beneficial to put in what lessons you learned through that. So what might you do differently next time? And that demonstrates your commitment as well to, you know, continually learning and developing. You'll also need to provide an up-to-date CV showing you're active within the scope of the IT and digital profession. Because although we award chartered engineer, obviously if it's through BCS, so you should be active in the IT or digital field. And you'll need to deliver details of a supporter who can verify your application. So that could be a colleague, a peer, or a line manager, but it does need to be somebody that knows your work and can verify that the evidence in your application is accurate. So the other, as I mentioned earlier, underpinning knowledge and understanding, that needs to be assessed if you don't have an accredited degree. And that's delivered through what's called AHEP, the Accreditation of Higher Education Programs. And within there are a number of learning outcomes. And I've provided a link later on for you to see that. But basically the areas that you need to deliver evidence are science and mathematics, engineering analysis, design and innovation, the engineer and society, and engineering practice. And there's a little statements there alongside what those mean. But when you go in to see the learning outcomes, you'll note that some of those learning outcomes will naturally come in your evidence of competence within the UK spec. So when you're writing your statements of the activities you've undertaken to meet the requirements of the criteria, it will naturally meet some of those learning outcomes. However, there are other areas that are not quite so obvious. So, for example, in the science and mathematics, when you're delivering your evidence in A1 and A2, it would be useful to look at the learning outcomes within the AHEP to make sure that you do cover off the requirements within there, so that you do clearly demonstrate how you're delivering against engineering principles and science and maths. Similarly, there are some other areas that are not necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily naturally deliver evidence against. So, for example, use of technical literature is one area within the AHEP. As you look through it, you'll see. So, you know, it's important that you cover that off. And there's some areas around security that you might not naturally mention unless you're in a role that required that. So I do recommend having a look through there if you're going down the experiential route. So going into your experiential statements, so under the knowledge and understanding, it's basically, these are the two criteria in there. You've maintained and extended the sound theoretical approach to enable you to develop your particular role. And you're developing technology solutions to unusual or challenging problems. So this is all, and of course this is at chartered level, so it's going to be very complex, and it's about you dealing with complex issues and complex technical issues particularly, and in situations with significant risk. So and then when you look in the UK spec, there are some examples of the type of evidence that that you might want to deliver against that. So hopefully you'll find that really helpful. So there is, and that, I mean, those two statements are expecting you to deliver the evidence, the knowledge and understanding evidence. So as you can see, if you go into the AHEP, the accreditation of higher education programs, and the learning outcomes there will help you more with actually delivering this evidence. Then B is design, development, and solving engineering problems. And there are 3 sets of criteria in there. I'm not going to read these out. I mean, you can see those there, but this is very much around problems and identifying opportunities and implementing engineering tasks and undertaking design and development and analysis. And then C, where there's 4 criteria. You know, the criteria seems to go up as you go down. So there's 4 criteria under C. And this is about your leadership and management. So this is planning work and resources needed to enable an effective implementation. So as I said, it's not necessarily line managing anybody, but it is about planning and resourcing, maybe managing budgets or determining programs or schedules of work, or it could be then leading teams or technical specialisms. So, and I'm sure at this level, you're certainly going to have responsibility for you know, leading technical activities, even if you're not line managing anybody. You'll certainly have some, and I'm sure you'll have some sort of functional responsibility for managing people's actions or managing things in a more strategic overview within the organization. And then this is your communication and interpersonal skills. So as I mentioned earlier, this is about communicating effectively, and the UK spec does specifically say at all levels in English. And you demonstrate your personal and social skills and awareness of diversity and inclusion issues. So, and that's quite an important thing. I mean, again, it's sort of potentially lost in just saying communication and interpersonal skills, but it does specifically point out or pick up the requirement to demonstrate your awareness of diversity and inclusion issues. And then your personal and professional commitment. So again, you'll be delivering evidence against that. So there's, you know, understand and comply with relevant codes of conduct, because as BCS members, you'd have all signed a code of conduct, which I'm sure you all know off by heart. But obviously, as a member of BCS, then and having signed that code of conduct, that does provide you the opportunity to demonstrate that you understand and comply with the code of conduct. Safety implications within your role and how you apply and improve safe systems of work. The principles of sustainable development. So this was, and this is what I should have said earlier. This is UK Spec 4th edition. So this was only updated and went live with us in December of last year. And this was an addition, the understand the principles of sustainable development. So again, you need to deliver evidence about how you meet that requirement. And then, as I mentioned earlier, carry out and record the continued professional development necessary. So that's what continued professional development have you done? What are your intents for the future? And then understand the ethical issues, which again, I mentioned earlier, that may arise in your role, and carry out your responsibilities in an ethical manner. So that's the criteria that you'll find in the UK spec. So that's what you deliver where you deliver your evidence against those areas. Now, the Engineering Council again are quite clear that you may not, your areas of evidence will be stronger in some areas than in other areas. So, and the assessors will make that judgment. So they'll be looking at your evidence and then making a judgment on that evidence on balance based on whether you meet the requirement of the criteria, with a recognition that there are going to be areas of strength, there are going to be areas that may be slightly weaker, but the Engineering Council do allow for that. If there are some areas where you're just falling short, then at that initial review, it does provide the assessors the opportunity to come back for further information. And they can do that either you'll be communicated by email asking for some further information around particular areas, or they can, if they so wish, arrange a phone call. So arrange with you to have a phone call to basically discuss some areas for maybe clarity purposes. But that's basically what they make their judgments about. And then if you're successful at that initial review, then that will be passed on to the interview stage. And then at interview, well, I'll wait till John joins. And when John joins and I hand over to John, he'll talk to you about what the assessors are looking for. And I provided a link at the bottom of that slide to our Chartered Engineer page on the BCS website, where you'll get all this, you can find all the information around this. So basically, this is the process. So you'll apply and you'll submit your application form, and the service delivery team will first check that you've supplied all the necessary documentation. And if there's any documentation missing, then they'll obviously come back to you and request for that, whatever the documentation is. So the areas where things can be delayed are if you don't provide all the required documentation in the first instance. So that will cause a delay in your application being processed. And then the BCS will contact your supporter to verify your application. And again, if there's a delay in hearing back from your supporter, that will make the process take even longer. So can I ask, when you do apply, you make sure your supporter is absolutely aware that one, they are supporting your application, and two, that they're aware that they will hear from BCS. And the quicker they go back, the quicker we can progress the application through the process. Then your application CV and supporter statement will be sent to an assessor for initial review. They may ask for additional information, and if so, then obviously the sooner you can pass that back to them, the better, because that will keep the process moving. And at that stage, then the assessor will make a decision whether you've passed or failed at that initial review stage. And if unfortunately you fail, then you'll be informed by our service delivery team. However, if they determine that it's a pass, then you'll be moved on to the interview stage, and you'll be recommended for a peer review interview. So BCS, the service delivery team, will then contact you, and they will try and arrange a convenient date for you to be interviewed. At the same time, they'll be seeking 2 assessors and checking their availability dates. So we'll find a date that fits for both you and the assessors, and then they'll arrange for an interview. So we currently use web tools for the interview. It's done online. I don't think we're on Teams yet. I think the intention is to move towards Teams, but I think at the moment we're still using GoToMeeting for those interviews. So once that's been arranged, then obviously you'll have the interview with 2 assessors. And I say interview, and that sounds very daunting. And it's not, and it shouldn't be, because actually the assessors are there to help draw out your evidence. So to help you deliver the evidence you need to achieve CEng. They're not there to trip you up. They're not there to try and find out how much you don't know. They're there to draw out from you the evidence you have against the UK spec in an attempt to get you CEng. So they're not, and I know, and so it's more a discussion. It's a discussion around your evidence and the requirements of the UK spec. And at the end of that, the assessors will make a recommendation, and the recommendation will be to award or decline, and that will be passed back into the service delivery team, and the service delivery team then will contact the EC review panel, and the EC review panel consists of experienced assessors with BCS, some of them still undertaking assessment roles, but experienced assessors within BCS, who will then review those decisions, and they will then either support or otherwise the decision by the assessors. And as I mentioned earlier, they can overturn an award, they cannot overturn a decline. Their decision then be passed through to BCS service delivery, and then you'll be contacted by service delivery to inform you of the outcome. And if you're successful, you then should receive a certificate pack from the Engineering Council awarding you Chartered Engineer. So as I say, the interview will be 2 assessors. It's held online using video conferencing. The interview lasts up to an hour, and John, I don't know if John's on yet, but when John comes on later, he'll give you more detail on that. And you should be notified following the interview within, I believe, 10 working days of the outcome. And then obviously successful applicants will receive a certificate pack. So that's the process. I'd now like to talk about some supporting tools as BCS members that you have access to. So we have mentoring opportunities as a BCS member. So if you go on to My BCS and under career development, go to mentoring. And if you go on there, then you can register yourself as somebody looking for a mentor. And you can hopefully be paired up with somebody who's seeking to mentor someone for, towards CEng, and they can help you through the process. They can support you, help you complete your application, draw out the right evidence towards your application, and actually initially, I suppose, first help you identify and recognise whether you are ready to apply for CEng, and if you're not, what areas you need to develop, and help you plan to develop that. So I think that's a really good tool. So I recommend, particularly if you're not sure or you're keen to apply for CEng, but you really like some further guidance and support, I would recommend that you visit the mentoring site. I think that could be really helpful to you. And the other area that could be quite helpful is SOFIAPlus. And again, as a member of BCS, you have access to the SOFIAPlus framework. So it's the SOFIA framework, but with much more detail. So the plus aspect are the details around the types of underpinning knowledge that you might require, the types of activity you might take, first professional development activities that you could undertake. And I'll show you a little snippet from it in a little while. But if you look through SOFIAPlus, then you can identify the skills that are relevant to you in your role, and then click into that and get much more detail. So SOFIA is, if you don't know, SOFIA is the Skills for the Information Age framework. So it's made up of categories and skills, and within that you'll find they're at levels 1 to 7. Not every skill is at levels 1 to 7. The skills are at levels appropriate for how you might employ them. So, for example, I think architecture, in fact, I'll show you a snippet in a minute, rather than explain it without showing you, I'll show you a snippet. So CEng sits around level 5 and level 6. It sort of crosses the boundaries of level 5 and level 6. So if you're looking at skills, if you look around those two areas, that'll help you identify particularly the type of work activities that you might then draw on from to present your evidence. So so this is what it looks like, and this is just a snippet from it. So as I was mentioning earlier, you've got strategic planning here. Now, strategic planning is only at levels 5, 6, and 7. And information systems coordination 6 and 7. So they're not set at every level. But if you were to look down, and this is just to say a snippet, there's a whole maths framework there. But if you look down at these skills and identify the ones that apply to you, then you can click in to the level that's relevant to you, or 5 or 6, and then look at the types of work activity that are within there and sort of use that as evidence, or look at what the knowledge and skills requirements are. Or if it's an area that you think you need to develop, then you can look at what training opportunities might be available there, or professional development activities. And then when you do go into it, this is what you'll find. So there's work activities, and then there's knowledge and skills and training. So this is just open on the work activities. And so here are some examples, so architecture development, leads development of solution architectures. So hopefully you'll find that really useful. It is, I think, a really useful tool that not often do people use to support their applications. So yeah, please use that, and please use our mentoring scheme. Now, I'm not sure if John is on yet.
I'm here.
Yes, he is.
John is there. Ah, excellent. Thank you, John. So I'm now going to hand you over to John. John Nicholson has very kindly, as one of our volunteer assessors, offered to come along and talk about the assessment for CEng from an assessor's perspective. So John, thanks very much. And can I hand over to you now?
Yeah, of course, Ross. Can you see me and hear me, first off?
I can see and hear you.
Great. That's a pity for everybody else, I guess. Okay, so very quickly, just because Ricky's got a message, I started typing and halfway through. Ricky, to answer your question there, it's a really good one. It really depends on the mentor, to be honest, and if they've got a relationship with any assessors. But what I can say is mentors can reach through the ops team to ask specific questions of the good people and the good assessors, my fellow colleagues, and get those answers for you. But if you've got any more questions than that, please shout out at the end. Okay, so just to introduce myself, John Nicholson. I'm a Royal Air Force engineer officer, now known as a cyberspace professional because we've just changed our name recently. But I am a chartered engineer, a chartered IT professional. I have been for over 3 years now. I'm also a chartered engineer assessor, hence why I'm here today. We're doing that for just over a year. But probably more critically, I've helped Russ and the rest of the team develop the new assessment procedures and techniques, but more importantly, the form as we move to the version 4, which Russ has gone through today. So I want to break this down into 3 parts. The application, something you'll do, the initial review is what we'll do, and also the professional review interview as well, which is something we'll do as well. And they're the 3 distinct things we'll get involved with. There are other parts of it which I will probably allude to, or I'll take questions on at the end. So as Russ said there, the application form. So what we've done now is the application form goes directly from filling it in, going through A1, A2, B1, B2, etc., right the way through. They'll be assessed directly on those points in the initial review, and we'll do the same on the interview as well. So as you can imagine, what's really critical about that is making sure that you fill it in correctly. And the key part really, and this is no real surprise, and exactly the same as filling in a CV or exactly the same filling in a job application form, is get the language right. You're going to be writing your application form to speak to the assessor and tell them about your career. So you need to make sure that you communicate in the right way. And by that, I mean, assume that they, as an industry expert, you may be into the cybersecurity. You could be deep into the built environment, digital transformation. You could be deep into data techniques or artificial intelligence. So you're a deep specialist. There is no guarantee that the assessor is going to understand completely your technique. As you can imagine, as a Royal Air Force engineer, we've got our own jargon, we've got our own language that we speak as much as any other area. So make sure that your application is written in plain English. Make sure any acronyms are busted. Make sure that you can accurately communicate what you have done. That's hopefully self-explanatory. The next part is about technique. Russ has already alluded to or mentioned to you about STAR, so situation, task, action, result. It's not a bad handrail to fill the form in. So in A1, write, comment on a situation, write what task you're fulfilling, what actions you took forward to resolve that situation, and what the results were. And if you fill it in that way and go through that methodology, you're going to make sure that you are communicating, you are expressing specifically what you've done. And go through that A1, A2, B1, B2, B3. There will be absolutely times when you get to the C's, D's, and E's that the situation and task may be exactly the same as one previous. That's fine. Just comment on that. Say, as per the task in A1, I did this, I did that. Which leads me to the next part. It's all about you. And I'm going to go through this probably a couple of 3 times as part of this little bit. It is all about you. There are so many times that we see in application forms that say the humility of we did this, we did that. It doesn't matter about the team. It's all about you. So you need to make sure that you write in that way as well. I did this, I did the other. Be very specific of what you've done. And the third part then will be making sure that you can give metrics. So if you had 10 direct reports, say that. Saying that you managed a team is all well and good enough, but we need to make sure that we see the metrics. I managed a team of 20 people doing these tasks. Or maybe it was a matrix managed organization and you had functional management for a specific task, or maybe you had, from a pastoral point of view, you had some workforce you're in charge of. But be clear, but if you can use the metrics behind that, I managed a budget of X amount million pounds, I managed risks to the value of X, Y, and Z. I managed a team over 10 countries. Those metrics bring it to life. And the fourth part, and probably final part on the application form, is about which level you're going in for. So when we look at IEng, we are looking at almost managing the status quo. We're looking at making sure that you can take a task, take it forward, and deliver upon it in a defined way. When we go into CEng, we're then moving into the more high levels of risk, high levels of resource, high levels of financial budgetary management, and high levels of innovation as well. And that's where we go into CEng. So that's the application form. As I say, make sure the language is right, make sure you answer the question, and make sure that it's all about you. Once that comes into us, we're going to receive from yourselves an application form and a CV. We will take those two artifacts in and we will look at them. So as Russ has said, there'll be 2 assessors are assigned, and we take it through and we look at it. Our review form looks almost like a mirror image of your application form. So what we then do is, first off, look at your background based from your CV and the application. We'll make a comment on that. We then go through through A1, A2, B1, B2, etc., and make direct reports on, have you answered the question? Where it says in the UK spec in A1 the guidelines of that, we will just look against that and say, can we see that individual is at the right standard? And if they are, we'll say above, meets, or below, very simply. And we will go through that, each one of them. When we've gone through all this, and it's gone back between the 2 assessors, we will then make a judgment on whether that individual has met the right standard to go through to the interview. If they have, what we will do is, if it's all accepts or it's all aboves, or meets or aboves, I should say, we will then make a comment which will say this individual meets the standard. If there's areas they need to work on, we will specifically say that, and normally it's a case of, make sure you have a copy of the UK spec to hand at the interview, because maybe A1 and C3, there's a weak example, please bring a better example to the interview, or something similar to that. If you are not at you're almost the right standard, but not quite there might be more information we need. And as Russ has said, we can go through the information. We may ask for a telephone call just to clarify a few points. Although that's the exception, not the rule. If at the right standard, we will say that in the application. We'll just say the candidate has shown a A1 and A. We don't believe that now. We reapply in 6 months. We make that, or it could be something very. The applicant candidate hasn't actually, please resubmit immediate specific what we're doing. But most 9 out of 10 times, we will say that it's gone through, and we'll give people back. Someone said that I'm dropping out a bit there. Is that pretty bad?
Yeah, John, I don't know. Yeah, it's stuttering a bit.
We'll just try and.
Okay, is that any better?
It seems to be.
Okay, let's go with that and see if that's any better.
John, could you go back just a
Okay,
fraction?
my apologies.
Could you go back just a fraction and
Absolutely, no
repeat the
problem.
last few points?
It's not a problem at all. So the key point, as I was saying there, is when we're reviewing your application form, when we get to the end of it, we will make a recommendation. On the recommendation, it will be largely we accept most that come through because of the high caliber of the candidates going through, and then when we accept them, we'll make comments. Maybe there's some areas that we want them to bring a bit better example to the interview. We will say that. If it is not going through to the next stage, we will make comments on the specific areas. Sometimes it's just not enough detail in the form, so we will say, please resubmit with better detail. Or we may say, actually, if the candidate's quite a junior, if they're going for CEng, for example, and they just don't have the body of evidence to back it up, and we'll see that from the CV and the application form, we will ask them to maybe come back in 6 months or 12 months' time. But again, we will be very specific. So now, when we go to the interview, again, it's almost again a reflection on the application form, and it supports the initial review. On there, we will introduce the candidate will come through. We'll ask you the normal admin questions. Are you fit to proceed to the interview? Do you have a copy of the UK spec with you? Have you got some ID? So we do an ID check. Once we're happy with that, we will record the interview. At the interview, you'll have 2 assessors. And those 2, and we will go through again the UK spec in order: A1, A2, B1, B2. What we're trying to do with this is you'll see that in the D areas of the UK spec, one of them is be able to speak in English. So we'll be confirming your ability to communicate effectively. So we'll go through that. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is to make sure you are who you say you are, which is fine. And it's to clarify. That's part, the most important part is clarifying your application has got enough information for us to be able to support your award of chartered engineer or incorporated engineer. So that's the reason why we go through that process. And we don't do anything to catch you out. Again, we're doing it to elicit from yourselves sometimes, or maybe again, if you've got a weak example, get a bit more detail on it so we can make sure you're at the right standard. And we go through that one by one in turn and clarify it. And like all interviews, at the very end of it, we will ask that simple question: is there any other information you wish to provide to us? And if there is anything, great, bring it in. We're always welcome. If there's something you go, oh, well, you know something, at A2, I forgot to say something. So what we will do, get the opportunity to say, well, actually, I meant to say earlier X, Y, and Z. And we'll say, okay, no problems at all. And that's really helpful. At the end of the interview, we'll say thank you very much, and you will depart the call. And after you departed, the 2 assessors will have a quick conflab to make sure that we're content, that we've got the information, we'll make our judgment, and then we'll write it up and make the recommendation on the end. And that's it. That's a simple process. As I say, application form, make sure you write it in a way that's understood and has the right information. We'll review that at the initial review, and the interview will confirm that information. And that's a simple process. At this point, I will stop talking and I will take any questions, unless Russ wants anything else to answer.
So we've had a couple of questions there. I think you've answered some of those already, John. So you've been well up on the game there. There's one that I'm going to take from Gareth that says, I'm going to cough first, obviously. Are there numbers we can share of the failure rates at each stage? I have to be honest with you, Gareth. I don't know the failure rate numbers actually at this current time. I don't. Our failure rates are not high, that I know, and I certainly know that they decline as you go down. So those that pass the initial review, there's a very high pass rate. Then go on to pass the professional review, the interview, and then very few are ever overturned by the EC review panel. And you would expect that as well, but I don't think we have a high failure rate at any stage at all of the process. So the other question that was asked, and I've been asked to mention this tonight, is somebody asked, I'm retired, can I still apply for actually it was CITP. So I was asked if I could provide a response for CEng as well. And John can interrupt and tell me if he disagrees. But as long as you're still active in the profession, and you could be active in many ways. So for example, you might be retired, but you might be doing volunteer work for a charity or something like that. So you're still employing the skills and delivering the skills. So arguably, there's no reason if you wanted to apply for chartership. But it does mean that you do need to be delivering evidence that's current and up to date. So if you can provide the evidence that meets the requirement of the standard, then actually, I mean, almost term retirement's a thing of the past, because we can go on to work for our whole lives now. But yeah, so as long as you can deliver the evidence, then there's not a problem. Now, just dipping down to the messages, I think we've got another question.
Can I come into that point?
Yeah, please do.
Really good point there. When it comes to applying, if you've not, say, if you've been out of management for, or you've not been in the coal face, or when I say coal face, it's very difficult in engineering capacity. But if you've been, say, you moved away into you're now a chief information officer, and you don't get involved in some of the day-to-day business for the last, say, 10 years or so, it becomes very difficult to bring up current examples of where you've been delivering against the CEng. So I had that recently where somebody who's they did pass, but it was very difficult to get some really up-to-date evidence that they actually meet the standard because of just natural moving forward in their careers. So it's just something you've got to be really cognizant of when you apply for CEng.
So thanks for that, John. We've got another question here. Someone says, I'm already CITP registered. How does this compare to CEng applications? I mean, the process is very similar for both, actually. It's just you're applying against a different standard, and there are subtle differences between the standards. John, you're both CITP and CEng. I don't know if you wanted to expand on that at all.
Yeah, so the process for CEng and CITP is actually very similar. In fairness, you're giving evidence against set criteria, and then you're interviewed against it. And actually, some of the competencies within there are very similar as well. So if you're at CEng, there's a very good chance you will CEng through the BCS. You'll more than likely walk through CITP. If you're CITP, but maybe you're more on the dev space or in the C-suite, you may struggle in some of the areas to get CEng, but actually you'll probably be okay. So there is a bit of a judgment call, and that's why I would definitely say get a mentor and somebody who can really help you through that process.
And we've got the next question is, can academics apply? FBCS teaching cybersecurity and managing HPC. I think, and I don't know, you may agree, John, but often we get academics think they can't apply for this because, well, I don't work in the field. And it's like, and in my mind, I always think, but you're delivering the next generation of engineers. If you're not employing engineering in your academic role, then that would be barking. Surely you can. So, and I saw you're nodding, John. So it sounds like.
It's a big nod for me. So academic, absolutely. In fact, we had one through. I went through an interview with one the other day. So the evidence that academics can get, because the most, if you're in charge of a faculty or you are running a department, you're running finance, you've got resource, you've got so you're. And actually, because you're doing lots of in an academic capacity, a lot of the time you're doing research, so your A's and B's are covered off really quickly. So what I would say is that I would actively encourage academics to apply, because also that's helping society from an engineering capacity point of view, make sure the next generation of chartered engineers are being taught by yourselves. So definitely.
Then the next question is, for my CITP interview, I was asked to give a 10-minute presentation. Would this also be the case for the CEng interview?
No. So
it's different, isn't it?
So for the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and I believe the IMAC potentially as well, they do require a presentation as part of the interview process. However, the British Computer Society, we do not do that. So BCS do not require that. As I say, we just go through the UK spec and cover it off that way.
So I've got an interesting question. The next one, does your specific specialization matter to the application, and does this affect the mentor you're assigned? So, I mean, I think there are well, I suppose I'd hand over to John there. Does your specific specialisation matter to the application?
So, not to go into specifics, a recent experience would say, make sure you've got a background in digital cyber data when you're applying. So CEng is a standard that all professional engineering institutions can award. As a licensing body, we can in the BCS. If you've remember the BCS for some reason, and actually you're largely in the civil sector or maybe in the built environment sector, and do very little in the digital IT data cyber capacity, then we struggle sometimes to get the evidence out of you from a BCS point of view. So the answer is not really, but there are some outliers who are in the BCS who don't do much computing type stuff. So that's probably best advice. The second part, the mentor, Russ, I'll leave it to you because I don't deal with the mentor side.
Yeah, so the way and I've not used our mentor site personally, but the way I understand it is that you'll find people that are looking to support people through their chartered applications, CEng, CITP. That's who you'd be looking for, and then I think you then get to pair up, so you sort of choose the best fit for you. But again, that's our membership team can certainly help that. They run the mentoring site, but I think that I think the best thing to do is go on into my BCS, go onto that mentoring page and just have a look around. It will give you a good insight into it there. But I don't think you necessarily get assigned an assessor. I think that's an agreed between assigned a mentor. It's between you and that mentor. You choose each other.
Does already previously CEng with the IET, been in IT space for many years now, any merit in CEng via BCS, right? So CEng, so there's no need, if you're already CEng, you're CEng. CEng in the BCS, CEng in the IET, CEng in IMAC, Royal Aeronautical Society, Institute of Explosives, it's all the same standards. So we are a licensing body and awarder on behalf of the Engineering Council. What you can do, if you wish to, is transfer your CEng from one professional engineering institution to another, but you don't go for CEng in the BCS instead. That's not a thing.
The next one, it says each section of the CEng application form asks for multiple examples showing competency, which seems very precise. I would see this as being very precise, providing metrics and describing projects in detail. However, there's a 250-word cap per section. Can you give some advice? I think I'd go back to, so you don't need to give a number of examples for each section. It might be that you're only giving one significant example in a section. I think I'd go back to that STAR principle, that actually, because that's the thing that will make you draw out the really relevant stuff. And if I was going to focus my energy in that STAR process, it would be around the actions and the results. The situation and the task will be quite short, so don't use too many words in there, but where you want to put your effort is in the actions and the results, because that's the stuff where you'll demonstrate your competence and you'll deliver that really valuable evidence.
Yeah, completely agree. So one solid example is better than a few multiple examples that have got no evidence behind them. So just if you can concentrate on getting one solid example per, then that's great. Two solid examples within the word limit. There is no real word limit. We just want to make sure, because as you can imagine, as volunteers, we've got to go through lots of these things. So help us out. If you help us out, we're more likely to help you out as well. So that's great. From Lee there, how far back in time can evidence be taken from? It's a judgment call. So if you've not done engineering in accordance with UK spec for 20 years, then we're going to struggle to be able to support your application for CEng. So what I would say would be is that maybe you've got A1, A2, B1, B2, C2, C3, all down, all fine. You can't find that C1. So maybe you go, well, actually, I did that in my more junior career doing some project management task, and you bring that forward into it. That's fine. But if your majority of your application is based on something you did 20 years ago, that would be a bit tricky for us.
And we've got one from Gareth here, and I think we'll then have to move on after this one because I've just recognised the time. So it says, I'm a senior architect, but might struggle a little on the management side. Would advising directing the direction of development be effective for this kind of thing?
Yeah, it could be. So it's interesting, and from military context, we talk about leadership all the time. Leadership is not necessarily, management is not necessarily having direct reports or having people who you order around the battlefield. Clearly, I'm in the Air Force, I don't worry about the battlefield, but you know what I mean. Air Force joke, sorry, probably missing a lot of people, including myself. So if you can legitimately express that competency through an example, that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem whatsoever. Just do it within the spirit of what was been asked in the competency, and then you're likely to be successful when it comes to the assessor.